I wasn't expecting anything dramatic that night. I was just standing by the kitchen island at Mark's little get-together, swirling a glass of white wine and chatting about nothing important. You know that warm buzz you feel when the lighting is low, the music is soft, and everyone seems to be laughing at the same frequency. That was me, relaxed for the first time in weeks. I didn't have Daniel on my mind for once, not his long work hours, not his clipped tone, not the way he'd barely looked at me that morning. I was just breathing, finally. And then Mark walked over and changed everything. He came up behind me with that awkward half-smile he always had when he wanted to ask something personal. I thought he was about to bring up a recipe or ask whether I liked the wine. But instead, he leaned closer, way too casually, and said, "So, did you forgive him? I mean, are you two okay now?" The words didn't just hit me. They detonated inside my chest. My breath stalled. My fingers tightened around my wine glass until I felt the cold condensation slipping between them. Forgive him? Forgive Daniel? For what? Nobody had told me anything was wrong. Nobody. And suddenly the room didn't feel warm anymore. Everything tilted. I forced a smile I absolutely did not feel and asked him what he meant. He froze like I'd caught him stealing something. He mumbled that he thought I knew, that he just assumed we'd talked. And the way his eyes flicked between the floor and my face made my stomach lurch. I felt this slow, crawling dread rising inside me, the kind that makes your skin cold even when the room is warm. I wanted to shake him, to make him spit out the truth, but I couldn't even breathe properly. My heart was pounding so loudly it drowned out the music. And that was the moment. The exact moment. I realized something had been happening behind my back, and everyone but me seemed to know. I stepped away from Mark before he could dig himself any deeper. My smile was glued on, but inside I was unraveling thread by thread. I walked to the balcony just to catch some air, though the night breeze did nothing to steady me. My mind raced through every recent conversation with Daniel, replaying each clipped answer, each distracted nod, each moment he told me I was overthinking things. It was like watching a movie backwards and suddenly seeing scenes I'd missed the first time. My chest felt tight, and for a second, I genuinely wondered if this was what a panic attack felt like. Mark eventually followed me out, guilt written all over his face. He kept apologizing, tripping over his words like a child trying to hide a broken vase. He said he thought it was out in the open, and that Daniel had seemed devastated weeks ago, like something huge had happened. Each word he said only made things worse, because his expressions filled in the blanks he didn't dare speak aloud. I could feel anger simmering beneath the confusion now, hot and sharp. It wasn't just that something had happened. It was that everyone thought I already knew. Everyone but me. I asked him, quietly, calmly, which surprised even me, what exactly Daniel had told people. Mark hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck, glancing toward the sliding door as if hoping someone would rescue him. He muttered something about a mistake and things being complicated, the kind of vague nonsense that only makes your stomach drop faster. I felt this sudden wave of nausea wash through me, like the ground underneath my feet had tilted. All I knew was that whatever truth Daniel had kept from me, it wasn't small. It wasn't something you accidentally hide from your wife. And standing there under the dim porch light, I realized I wasn't leaving that house without digging deeper. When I finally left the party, it felt like I was driving through fog, except the fog was inside my head, thick and pulsing. The streetlights blurred, stretching into long yellow streaks, and my fingers kept drumming against the steering wheel without my permission. I kept hearing Mark's voice in my mind, that hesitant, "Did you forgive him?" looping like a broken record. Every mile home felt heavier, as if the truth itself was sitting in the passenger seat, waiting for me to look it in the eyes. My heartbeat didn't settle once. If anything, The silence of the car made it worse. When I walked into the house, everything looked painfully normal. Daniel's shoes by the door, his jacket thrown on the back of a chair, the faint smell of his cologne, warm, woody, familiar, hugging the air like it had every right to still comfort me. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of that familiarity crush me. How could a home feel so steady while my entire world was cracking at the edges? I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water with trembling hands, and tried to breathe. But the question, the ugly, unanswered question, stayed right there in my throat. I didn't confront him that night. I couldn't. Instead, I watched him sleep from the hallway, the soft rise and fall of his chest almost mocking. He looked peaceful, untouched, like a man with nothing gnawing at his conscience. And that made something inside me harden. I realized I couldn't just ask him outright. He'd spin a story, twist it, make me doubt myself. He'd done it before in smaller moments. No. If there was a truth, I needed to find it on my own. Quietly, carefully. Because whatever Mark had stumbled into, it was big enough to shake a marriage. And I wasn't going to let Daniel rewrite the story before I even learned the plot. The next morning, I woke up before Daniel, which almost never happened. My mind had barely rested. It felt like every hour of the night had been spent stitching pieces of fear and suspicion together. I moved quietly through the house, each step strangely deliberate, like I was walking inside someone else's life. I kept telling myself not to jump to conclusions, but, God, my gut felt like it had already decided for me. And isn't it awful how your body sometimes knows the truth before your heart can bear it? When Daniel finally came into the kitchen, he looked tired. But not the same kind of tired I was. His was the kind that comes from staying up too late watching TV. Mine was the kind that comes from having the floor pulled out from under you. He kissed the top of my head absent-mindedly and asked why I was awake so early. His voice was mild, almost bored. I felt this sharp sting in my chest because I realized I was searching his face for guilt, for discomfort, for something that would tell me Mark had misunderstood. But his expression was maddeningly neutral. I made coffee while studying him from the corner of my eye, paying attention to details I had ignored for months. How protectively he kept his phone near him, how he avoided eye contact when he talked about work, how he acted as if his inner world was none of my business. It suddenly hit me that I didn't know when he had become this distant, this closed off. The Daniel I married used to overshare, laugh loudly, touch me constantly. This man felt edited, cropped, like someone who had learned to hide things expertly. And that realization was the spark that pushed me toward the truth I feared. After he left for work, I sat at the table with my coffee going cold, staring at nothing and everything at once. The house felt unnervingly still, as if it were holding its breath with me. I kept replaying the last few months like a montage, his sudden late meetings, the way he'd step outside to take calls, the shift in his tone whenever I asked harmless questions. It all seemed so obvious now, like puzzle pieces that had been waiting for me to finally line them up. The dread that had started last night was back, sitting heavy in my stomach. I told myself I'd just take a quick look through the drawer where he kept receipts and miscellaneous papers, just to ease my mind. But once I opened it, curiosity morphed into something sharper, an instinct for survival. I sifted through old receipts, dry cleaning stubs, gas station slips. Most were nothing, but then I found an Uber receipt from 3 weeks ago. The date and time matched a night he'd claimed he was stuck in a conference room prepping for a presentation. Except the drop-off location wasn't the office. It was a boutique hotel on the other side of town. My breath caught mid-inhale, and for a moment, I thought I might actually be sick. My hands were trembling as I zoomed in on the map, as if I needed confirmation that betrayal had a physical address. I stared at that little pin marking the hotel, feeling my pulse thudding in my ears. A part of me still wanted to rationalize it. Maybe he was meeting a client? Maybe someone else used his account? But deep down, underneath the panic and denial, something inside me whispered, "This is it." The first real crack. The first undeniable sign that Mark hadn't misspoken at all. And suddenly, I knew I couldn't pretend this was a misunderstanding anymore. I couldn't get the hotel pin out of my mind, so I grabbed my phone and stepped outside onto the porch, needing fresh air, space, something to keep me from collapsing under the weight of what I'd just uncovered. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through my contacts until I found Mark's name. I hesitated, wondering if I should wait, if I should talk to Daniel first, if knowing more would help or shatter me further. But curiosity mixed with dread pushed me forward. When Mark answered, his voice was too gentle, too cautious, like he already knew why I was calling. I tried to keep my tone light, almost playful, as I asked him to remind me what exactly he had meant last night. He stuttered immediately, and that's when I knew without question, that he'd been dancing around a truth everyone else assumed I already held. I pressed a little harder, just enough to corner him without sounding accusatory. He sighed, long and heavy, and finally admitted that Daniel had confided in him weeks ago. Something about a mistake. Something about being terrified he had ruined everything. Something about needing time. Every vague word felt like a dagger dipped in poison. When the call ended, I just stood there gripping the phone, my thumb still hovering over the screen as if I could rewind the conversation and somehow make it hurt less. The sun was shining, kids were biking down the street, birds were chirping, this perfect little slice of normal life unfolding right in front of me while my own reality was quietly imploding. That contrast made the pain hit even harder. I realized then that whatever Daniel had done wasn't just a slip-up. It was big enough to confess to a friend, big enough to shake him, big enough to hide from me. And I felt something inside me shift, something cold, determined, almost surgical. I was done waiting for the truth to come to me. I was going to pull it out myself, piece by piece. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that felt almost physical, like someone had placed a brick right over my heart. I didn't want to start digging again, but I knew I wouldn't survive another day pretending everything was fine. I needed answers, not his versions, not his excuses, the truth. So after Daniel left, I set myself up at the dining table with his laptop, a cup of coffee, and a resolve I didn't even recognize in myself. My hands were steady now, colder, driven. It felt like stepping into a battlefield I never asked for but couldn't walk away from. I remembered how he'd once told me he barely used email anymore, which was laughable now. I went through his inbox first, finding nothing but work chatter and spam, too clean, too curated, too intentional. That's when I noticed the little folder tucked away under archived files, labeled with a bland, boring name that practically screamed, "Don't look here." When I clicked it open, my breath caught. The first thing I saw was a thread with a woman's name I didn't recognize. The emails were short but intimate, laced with inside jokes, late-night messages, and plans that didn't include me. Each line was a punch to the ribs. The deeper I scrolled, the more the truth bared its teeth. There were mentions of that night, complaints about guilt he couldn't shake, and even a message from him saying he wished things were simpler, that she doesn't deserve this. She, meaning me. Reading his words felt like swallowing glass. My vision blurred, and for a moment I had to close the laptop just to steady myself. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It had a timestamp, a paper trail, a voice, hers, his. And suddenly, I understood why Mark had looked so horrified when I told him I didn't know anything. Everyone else already had the map. I was the only one still lost. Eventually, I reopened the laptop, even though my stomach churned just thinking about what else I might find. I clicked through more threads, each one worse than the last. There were hotel confirmations, short messages arranging meetups, and even a photo she had sent him, a mirror selfie taken in what was unmistakably a hotel bathroom. My throat tightened so violently I had to press my fingers against it, as if I could physically keep myself from breaking apart. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's tragedy, except every word had my name written between the lines. Then I found the final blow, a message from her asking, "Do you think she suspects anything?" And his reply, the one that made my entire body go cold, "No. She never asks. She trusts me too much." Those words hit harder than anything else. It was the casual certainty in his tone, the confidence that I would never look, never question, never believe he was capable of this. He wasn't just cheating. He was relying on my loyalty to cover his tracks. I felt a wave of humiliation burn through me, sharp and acidic. My trust had become the weapon he used against me. I stood up so abruptly the chair scraped against the floor. I paced the room, my hands shaking, my eyes stinging. But oddly enough, I didn't cry. Not yet. There was a numbness settling over me, a strange quiet that felt like armor forming across my skin. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't too sensitive, like he'd claimed so many times. No, Daniel had built an entire secret life and counted on my silence to protect it. And now that silence was dead, something colder, sharper, far more deliberate was taking its place. I wasn't just uncovering the truth anymore. I was preparing for something else, something he would never see coming. Eventually, I needed to know who she was. I typed her name into social media, half hoping she wouldn't appear, half dreading that she would. And there she was, smiling in almost every photo, a little too polished, a little too eager to show off her life. I recognized her immediately as someone Daniel had once mentioned in passing, brushed off as barely part of the team. Now, looking at her face, I felt something dark and cold settle deeper into my chest. She was younger. She had that overly bright, always available energy that made insecure men feel important, and he had fallen for it. Or maybe he had chased it. Scrolling through her posts felt like pouring salt on an open wound. There were pictures taken near that same boutique hotel, little captions like, "Late nights are the best nights," photos with angles that suggested she was waiting for someone. Him. My mind replayed every moment Daniel dismissed my questions, every time he insisted I was imagining things, every argument he shut down with that quiet, exhausted tone. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. This was never an accident. It was deliberate. It was ongoing. It was being lived out in front of me without my consent. But with every new detail, every new wound, something else grew inside me, something steady, strategic, terrifyingly calm. I gathered everything: screenshots, emails, receipts, hotel confirmations. I saved them in a folder on my own laptop, labeling it with a name I would never forget. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was ammunition. And as I sat there in the cold glow of the screen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cars passing by, I made a silent vow. If he had built a secret world behind my back, I was going to tear it down in front of him, piece by piece, with the truth he thought I'd never find. For the next few days, I became an actress in my own home, one worthy of an award, honestly. I woke up beside him, made breakfast, asked about his day, even laughed at moments that made my stomach twist. Every gesture felt like a performance, every smile a mask stretched too tightly across my face. But Daniel didn't notice a damn thing. If anything, he seemed relieved, like the calm meant I had settled back into the version of me he preferred. Quiet, trusting, unaware. He had no idea that every second I spent acting was another second I spent sharpening the blade he had handed me. He looked almost boyish one morning, standing by the counter sipping his coffee, tapping his fingers against the mug. "It feels good that things are normal again," he said, more to himself than to me. Hearing that nearly made me laugh, one of those bitter, humorless laughs that sit right at the back of your throat. Normal. That was the word he chose. As if normal meant me staying blind. As if normal meant him walking around with two lives and hoping I'd never peek behind the curtain. His comfort fueled something inside me, a cold determination that made my pulse steady instead of frantic. While he lived in blissful ignorance, I finalized my plan. I knew confronting him alone would only give him space to manipulate the story, twist the truth, rewrite the narrative the way he always did. So I chose a different stage, one he couldn't control. A dinner, small enough to seem casual, intimate enough to trap him. I invited Mark, his sister, and two close friends. People he respected. People he'd never want to disappoint. People who thought highly of him. For now. I wanted witnesses, not for the drama, but for the clarity. When the truth came out, there would be no room for him to pretend it meant something else. The preparation became almost therapeutic. While he showered, I rehearsed my lines in my head. While he watched TV, I organized the evidence into neat, chronological order. Screenshots, email threads, hotel receipts, Uber details. Each piece printed and tucked into an envelope with unsettling precision. It was strange how calm I felt doing it, like I was crafting a presentation rather than exposing the collapse of my marriage. But maybe that was the only way I could survive it, by turning my heartbreak into strategy, my pain into structure. Inviting everyone was easier than I expected. Mark accepted instantly, though he sounded uneasy, like he already sensed what the night would bring. Daniel's sister, Emily, said she'd love to join us. She always adored me, always saw me as the best thing that ever happened to her brother. The others responded with friendly enthusiasm, completely unaware that we weren't celebrating anything. We were about to dissect a lie. When I told Daniel about the dinner, he looked pleased, flattered even. He said it was nice that things felt social again, and I swear, that moment alone almost made the revenge worth it. The night before the dinner, I stood in our bedroom watching him fold laundry, humming softly as if his world were perfectly intact. He didn't notice my eyes studying him, not lovingly but analytically, like I was looking at a stranger wearing my husband's skin. It struck me then how little I knew him now, how far he'd drifted while pretending he was still beside me. And instead of breaking me, that realization grounded me. I wasn't walking into that dinner as a wounded wife begging for an explanation. I was walking in as a woman who finally understood the value of her own silence, and how devastating it could be when broken at the right moment. On the day of the dinner, the house felt different, almost electric. I moved through it slowly, setting the table, arranging the chairs, making sure every detail looked warm and welcoming. It was ironic, really. I was preparing the perfect setting for the destruction of a lie. The scent of rosemary chicken filled the kitchen, candles flickered softly, and the warm lighting made everything look gentle. But beneath that softness was steel. I felt it in my bones. Every movement I made was laced with purpose, with anticipation, with a quiet, simmering fire that kept me focused instead of afraid. Daniel came home earlier than usual, smiling as he loosened his tie and complimented the smell of the food. He kissed my cheek, and I let him, though it felt like letting a stranger step too close. He said he appreciated the effort I was making to reconnect, and the irony of that nearly made me choke. But I stayed composed, nodding, giving him exactly what he expected, a wife smoothing things over. He didn't notice my eyes were too calm, too sharp. He didn't notice that each time he spoke, I filed away the sound of his voice, knowing it wouldn't matter much longer. When the doorbell rang and our guests began to arrive, Daniel looked genuinely excited, proud even. He poured wine, hugged his sister, laughed with Mark. Watching him, I felt this strange combination of pity and power rise in me. Pity for the man who thought secrets could stay buried. Power because I knew I was about to flip his entire world inside out. As everyone settled around the table, the air thickened with warmth and small talk. And right there, between the glimmering glasses and easy smiles, I felt my heartbeat slow into a steady rhythm. It was time. Not to expose him out of rage, but to reclaim the truth he'd tried so desperately to steal from me. Dinner began with laughter, the kind that sounds warm to anyone listening but feels hollow to the person keeping a secret. I watched Daniel across the table, his smile easy, his shoulders relaxed, completely oblivious to the storm tightening around him. He talked about work, joked with Mark, teased his sister about her new haircut. And for a brief second, I wondered how many times he had sat like this, confident and unbothered, while living a double life. The thought didn't break me anymore. It focused me. Every word he spoke was another reason to finish what I had started. When the conversation slowed and everyone reached for their wine, I rested my hands gently on the tablecloth. The fabric beneath my fingertips felt impossibly smooth, grounding me. "There's something I want to talk about," I said calmly, almost conversationally. Daniel glanced at me with mild curiosity, not concern. Not yet. I reached under my chair and pulled out the envelope, the one holding the truth he thought he had buried. His eyes flickered for a split second, barely a heartbeat, but I saw it. A crack. The first fracture in his composure, and it fueled me. I placed the envelope in the center of the table and slid it toward him. "I'd like you to open it," I said. My voice didn't tremble. I made sure of that. He laughed nervously, asking if it was some kind of surprise, trying to keep the mood light. But the room had already shifted. Mark stiffened. Emily's smile faded. The air thickened, heavy, expectant. And Daniel? He finally looked uneasy, like a man realizing he might be standing on a trap door, the kind he built himself. Daniel opened the envelope with a smile that twitched at the edges, the kind people wear when they're trying to convince themselves everything is fine. But when he pulled out the first printed screenshot, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. He stared at it, frozen, as if rereading it would somehow rewrite the words. Everyone at the table watched in silence, not hostile, just stunned. I could see the exact moment he realized he wasn't confused. He was caught. I spoke gently, almost kindly, because I wanted every word to land with precision. I told them how he had said I trusted him too much. I told them how he had claimed I never asked questions. I repeated his phrases exactly the way he'd written them, letting the room hear the version of himself he'd been so comfortable showing to another woman. Daniel's hands began to shake. He tried to say something, anything, but the words choked in his throat. For the first time in months, he couldn't lie. Not in that room. Not with those eyes on him. He flipped through the rest of the papers, hotel receipts, Uber routes, emails, late-night plans. Each page felt heavier than the last. His chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths as he sank back into his chair, defeated. Then came his whispered attempt at damage control. He said he had been confused, that he never meant to hurt me, that it didn't mean anything. But hearing him plead only made the humiliation sharper. He wasn't devastated because he lost me. He was devastated because he lost control. And that distinction was everything. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, with eyes full of panic, regret, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe fear, maybe shame. Maybe the realization that the woman he thought would stay quiet had found her voice. He whispered my name, begged for a chance to explain, to fix it, to talk privately. But I didn't owe him privacy. Not anymore. Not after he handed pieces of our marriage to another woman like they were scraps. I stayed calm, almost eerily so, and told him he'd already said everything that mattered, just not to me. Emily covered her mouth, stunned. Mark stared at the table, guilt simmering behind his eyes. One of our friends whispered, "Jesus, Daniel," under her breath. The room wasn't angry, just disappointed, like everyone was witnessing the fall of someone they once admired. And Daniel felt it. He felt every ounce of their judgment pressing down on him. He said he was still the same man, that he made one mistake, and that he never stopped loving me. Hearing it aloud made me feel strangely detached, like I had stepped outside my own life and was watching it dissolve through a window. I looked him straight in the eyes and told him the truth, the only truth that mattered, that I wasn't staying. Not one more day. Not one more lie. Not one more apology crafted to save his ego instead of our relationship. I told him he had underestimated me, underestimated the silence he mistook for weakness. And as I stood up from the table, steady and sure, I felt something inside me break free. Leaving him wasn't the punishment. The punishment was him realizing that the woman he betrayed was the one person who would have never done this to him. And he lost her forever. A few weeks later, life felt strangely quiet, quiet in a way that didn't hurt anymore. I had moved into a small apartment across town, nothing extravagant, but the peace in it felt luxurious. No late-night phone vibrations I wasn't allowed to check. No tightness in my chest when he came home smelling like unfamiliar perfume. Just me, my thoughts, and a calm I hadn't realized I'd been craving for years. Healing didn't come in a dramatic wave. It arrived in small, steady breaths, like my soul was relearning its own rhythm. One afternoon, I ran into Mark at a grocery store. He almost dropped the carton of milk he was holding when he saw me. He looked nervous, apologetic, unsure of whether he had the right to speak to me after everything. He asked how I was, carefully, gently, and for the first time, I answered honestly. "I'm okay," I said, and I meant it. Not the polite okay people use to avoid talking, but a real, grounded okay that came from surviving something I thought would destroy me. Then, awkwardly, with his voice barely above a whisper, he asked the question that had started it all. "So, did you ever forgive him?" The irony nearly made me laugh. Not a cruel laugh, just a disbelieving one. I felt this wave of clarity wash over me, warm and steady. Forgiveness had once seemed like the destination, the thing I needed to reach before I could move forward. But now, standing there in the refrigerated aisle under bright supermarket lights, I realized forgiveness had nothing to do with him at all. I looked at Mark for a long moment, letting the question settle between us. I could see the guilt still lingering in his eyes, the guilt of being the one who accidentally tore the curtain down. I didn't blame him anymore. If anything, he had given me the truth I needed, even if neither of us knew it at the time. I took a slow breath and felt the surprising lightness of having no lies left pressing against my ribs. "No," I said finally, my voice steady and sure. "I didn't forgive him, but not for what he did, for who he chose to be." Mark nodded, almost relieved, as if my clarity freed him too. He told me he had always admired my strength, though he admitted he hadn't realized how deep it ran until that night at the dinner table. Hearing that didn't inflate my ego. It steadied me. Strength hadn't been a choice, it had been a necessity, something built moment by moment in the quiet suffering Daniel never bothered to see. And standing there, I felt proud. Not of what I'd endured, but of what I'd reclaimed. We talked a little longer about ordinary things, work, groceries, the ridiculous price of produce, and it felt grounding, almost symbolic. Life didn't stop because mine had shifted. It kept moving, and for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to move with it. There was no bitterness in my chest, no ache clawing at my heart, just a steady certainty that I had done the right thing. By walking away, by refusing to carry his guilt, by letting the truth breathe instead of burying it again. I wasn't the broken woman he expected. I was someone entirely new. When I finally walked out of the store, the sunlight felt different. Brighter, warmer, almost like it was touching me with purpose instead of indifference. I stood there for a moment, letting it soak into my skin, realizing how long it had been since I felt anything so simple and pure without a shadow hanging over it. Healing wasn't a finish line. It was a series of quiet victories like this one. A moment of peace. A breath without fear. A truth that no longer hurt to hold. As I got into my car, I replayed my own answer in my head. No, I didn't forgive him. But not for what he did. The words settled into me like they belonged there. I wasn't defined by Daniel's betrayal. I wasn't shaped by his choices or his cowardice. I was shaped by the way I rose from it, the way I protected myself, the way I refused to be rewritten into the villain of a story he created. And strangely, for the first time, I felt grateful. Not for the pain, but for the awakening it forced upon me. Driving away, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked softer somehow, but stronger too, like someone who had walked through fire and come out knowing the heat would never scare her again. I whispered a quiet promise to myself that I would never let someone build their comfort on my blindness again. And as the road stretched out in front of me, wide and open and full of possibility, I realized the final truth. My revenge wasn't destroying him. It was reclaiming me.